Hi guys, it's Lindsay. Welcome back to The Wandering Reader. Today I'm going to be talking to you about all the books I put on my wish list this month. It was a bit of a bumper month, to be honest. I think I only had like 8 or 10 books on my March wish list, and I've had a count up of all of the books that I put on there in the intervening weeks, and it's 20. So we're going to try to go through these quite quickly because otherwise this is going to be a very long video. So without further ado, let's jump into the first book. The first book that I've got to talk to you about today is called Reader, I Married Him, and this is edited by Tracy Chevalier. And I heard about this book over at Krista's channel from Books and Jams, and she hauled this in her March book haul. And this is basically a collection of short stories celebrating Charlotte Bronte, and especially based on the book Jane Eyre, where the line Reader, I Married Him came from. And that line is especially special to me. I didn't want to say that phrase, but we'll go for it. I remember putting that on Facebook and updating my relationship status to married. Yeah, when I married my husband. Hadn't read Jane Eyre at that particular point, but I have read it since. So it really intrigues me for that reason as well. This has got a variety of different authors writing these short stories, including Tracy Chevalier herself. It's also got Emma Donoghue, Lionel Shriver, Audrey Niffenegger, Linda Grant, Susan Hill, and a plethora of others. So I just thought that this collection of stories sounded really intriguing, and would definitely be just something that I wanted to read. Next up is Burn for Burn by Siobhan Vivian and Jenny Han, and Kerrin from Ratherby Reading read this at some point in March, I think, and talked about it in one of her reading vlogs. And I'm actually reading this at the moment. I managed to pick up a copy of this from the library and I'm almost finished with it, and this basically is a YA contemporary book, and it's the start of a trilogy, and it's about these 3 particular girls who come together and put together a revenge plot against some people in high school that they have taken a disliking to. It sounds really bitchy, but it's not as bitchy as you might expect it to be. I'm quite enjoying it, and like I said, I'm nearly finished it. I've only got about 50 pages left. So that I put that on my wish list. So I guess what I'll be doing is putting the second book on my wish list, and then at some point picking that up from the library. Next up is Songs of Willow Frost, and this is by Jamie Ford, and I added this one to my wish list because I read Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet in March and really enjoyed it. So I was having a little look at some of the other books that he's written, and I believe this was the second book that he'd written. I think the first one was Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, and this follows 12-year-old William, and he's Chinese American, and he lives in an orphanage. Because I think 5 years previously his mother died, so obviously he had to go to this orphanage, and then for his birthday they get taken to this theatre and they're watching this particular film, and he sees on screen this actress who's called Willow Frost, and he's convinced that Willow Frost is his mother. So basically the story is about him escaping from this orphanage and trying to find his mother. So that premise sounds really intriguing. This is also set in Seattle, which of course Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet was as well, and it's set in 2 different time periods, set against a backdrop of the Great Depression, but also the 1920s as well. And I really love the 1920s, but also reading about the Great Depression and what people's lives were like at the time really intrigues me too. Next up is The Female of the Species, and this is by Mindy McGuinness. And I've heard quite a few people talk about this, but I finally put it on my wish list this month when I heard Chelsea from Chelsea Dolling Reads talk about it in her March wrap-up. And this is a book that centres around the theme of rape culture, and it's about a girl called Alex, and her older sister Anna was murdered 3 years ago, and the killer went free, and that changed Alex as a person. And there's a quote on the back saying that she learnt the language of violence, and it's obviously 3 years later, and we sort of see how she's getting on and how she's changed. So Chelsea had really good things to say about it, and I've heard other people say really good things as well, so I finally added it to my wish list. Next I want to talk about This Is How It Always Is, and this is by Laurie Frankel. This is another one of Kerin's recommendations from one of her reading vlogs. And this is about a little boy called Claude, and he is the youngest, I think, of 5 children in a family, and he wants to be a girl. And it's all about how the family navigate that, so how they first of all sort of try to pretend that it's not happening, and then sort of later on obviously accept it and sort of deal with it. And Kerin had really good things to say about it. She said that she learnt a lot from it, and she said that she thought it was really well written. So I haven't read enough books around that particular theme, and I thought this one would be a good one to pick up. Next up is The Dry by Jane Harper, and again this is another one that a lot of people have talked about and I've seen around, but I finally put it on my wish list, when Sabrina from Unmanaged Mischief talked about it in her March wrap up, and she had some quite good things to say about it. And I was kind of unsure because I didn't know whether it was going to be like a really commercial sort of thriller, and I didn't know whether I'd be interested in it, but I really trust Sabrina's judgment. And like I said, she had good things to say about it. This is, I believe, a thriller, and it's set in Australia, and it centres around a character who has to go back home to, and I think they're a journalist, and they have to investigate some sort of scandal that's going on in their hometown, and it kind of goes from there. I think it's a series, because I think the second book that she's brought out, Forces of Nature, I think it kind of links in with the first one, but I'm not overly sure about that. But like I said, trust Sabrina's judgment, and I added it to my wish list. Next I want to talk about The Girl Who Smiled Beads, and this is by Clementine Wamaria. Apologise if I've said that wrong. And I subscribed to Book Riot's emails, and there was an article in one of the emails that was 10 new April releases to put on hold at the library. I believe April is sort of National Library Month over in the States, so there's been a lot of sort of articles and things about loving your library and things like that, and I've really enjoyed reading those, and this was kind of one of them. And this isn't out in the UK certainly until April the 26th, and this is a non-fiction memoir, and it's about Clementine and her family, and set during the Rwandan massacre. And Clementine and her older sister escape from this massacre that's going on, and they make their way through 7 different African countries trying to basically survive and get away from what was going on, and lots of things happen to them along the way, both positive and negative. And then a few years later, when Clementine is 12, she gains asylum in the US, I think along with her sister as well. And it's also about her sort of navigating being in this new kind of environment. It sounded absolutely fantastic in terms of sort of learning a lot from it, and also, yeah, just kind of getting to grips with that particular part of history and stuff like that. So yeah, I added that one. Dread Nation by Justina Ireland was another one on that list, and I picked it up when I was out at the weekend. I saw a copy of it in foils. I went on a sort of booktuber meetup. I didn't buy it in the end because I thought I'd wait until it came out in paperback. This, I believe, is a fantasy story, and it's set against the backdrop of the American Civil War. And it's got something to do with zombies, so you throw zombies into the mix of the American Civil War and the Battle at Gettysburg and things like that, and I think it's got something to do with race and prejudice, but I think from what I remember it's about sort of like race relations being switched around or something like that. Anyway, the cover is also absolutely fantastic, and yeah, really excited about that one. Next up I have got Dress Codes for Small Towns, and this is by Courtney Stevens. This is another one that I've been seeing around quite a lot, but I finally put it on my list because Ashley over at Said the Story added it to her spring TBR, and when she talked about it again I remembered that I had been interested in it before, so I finally added it to my list. This is one of Books and Lala's favourite books. I think she read it a couple of years ago now. It was certainly on her list of favourite books from that particular year. And then when Ashley mentioned it, I thought I would add it. And this is a YA contemporary story about love, gender and friendship. I've also got Traitor to the Throne, and this is by Alwyn Hamilton. This is the second book in the Rebel of the Sands series, and I read Rebel of the Sands this month and really enjoyed it. This is a YA fantasy series set in the desert, and it's about, yeah, it's about this particular character who escapes from her town and joins this group of, I don't know, what do you call them, renegades, or I don't know. They're fighting for freedom basically, and I really enjoyed Rebel of the Sands. You guys know I'm not really into fantasy that much. It doesn't mean I don't read it at all. I do give it a go, but I did really enjoy that one, and I wanted to continue on in the series. I've had a couple of subscriber recommendations this month, and I absolutely love that. So yeah, whenever you guys have got a recommendation for me, please leave them in the comments of my videos, because I get so many great ideas, and these next couple are an example of that. The first one of which is Apple of My Eye, and this is by Helen Hanff. And this is described as a walking tour of New York. And I think it was in my last wishlist video I talked about a book that was set in New York, and I said if you had any recommendations for books set in that particular city, then I'd love to hear them. And one of my subscribers recommended this particular book, and when I saw that it was a walking tour of the city, I just thought that sounded right up my alley. So I think this is obviously non-fiction, but I just think it's going to bring back so many lovely memories. The other subscriber recommendation was Tiny Beautiful Things, and this is by Cheryl Strayed. And again, I think I was talking about the fact that I love Cheryl Strayed, both as a writer and as a person, I suppose. I've never met her, obviously, but she apparently used to be an anonymous agony aunt on the internet, and she had this page called Dear Sugar, and people obviously used to write to her about her problems, and she'd answer them on this particular page. And this book is basically a collection of the best advice that she gave people, and I think mostly it was to do with love and relationships, and that sounded just so interesting, so I added that one too. Next up I have got A False Report, and this is by T. Christian Miller and Ken Armstrong, and this was a recommendation from Lisa over at Books and Smiles. She talked about this in her March wrap up, and this is about a couple of different things. This is a non-fiction book, so it's sort of like an account of what happened, and it focuses around an 18-year-old girl called Marie, who a masked man broke into her home and then raped her, and she reported the crime, and from the very get-go the police and people around her were sort of suspicious of her story, didn't really believe what she was saying, and eventually she told the police that she had lied, that she hadn't been raped, that this hadn't happened, and the charges were dropped. But then it also talks about this particular detective who is on the hunt for a serial rapist, and I think she comes across Marie's story and is sort of investigating whether actually maybe Marie was telling the truth. So I think it's going to provide some really good commentary on rape culture, on the sort of idea of being believed, and because you hear about all the time in the news that sort of idea of people not being believed, of being quite difficult to convict a rapist, and I find that mind-boggling. I find it really difficult to get my head around the idea that these girls can just be accused of lying when they've been through such terrible ordeals, but I suppose also boys as well. Yeah, so I think it would be really interesting from that point of view. Lisa also recommended in that wrap up Duplicity, and this is by Sybil Hodge. I don't remember a lot of the premise, but this is a thriller, and like me, she likes herself a good thriller, and this is about a couple where the husband is murdered, and then they're trying to work out who did it. Was it sort of somebody close to him who didn't like him very much, or was it somebody else? So she had really good things to say about it, so I added that one. I've been sort of more inspired to use my library since doing my library haul, which I put up a few weeks ago now. I'll link that for you if you haven't seen it. But just, yeah, really excited that I can get things out from the library basically. And sort of having a look at my shelves at different things where I'd read the first book in a trilogy, for example, and never sort of picked up the next book. And The Sleeping Prince by Melinda Salisbury is a good example of that. This is the second book in the Sin Eater's Daughter trilogy. And this is a YA fantasy trilogy about a girl called Twylla. That's probably not how you pronounce it. It's spelled Twyylla, and she's the king's executioner. And basically anybody that she touches, she kills. So they use her to basically punish people in the state that they want to get rid of, basically. And I remember quite liking it, but it's been quite a few years since I've read that now, and I've never really even thought about picking up the second one. I don't even think at the time when I was reading it I knew that it was a trilogy, but I know that since, and so I put The Sleeping Prince on my wish list just because I can get out from the library. I've had a little search up, so why not continue on. Another one in that sort of vein is The Dream Thieves by Maggie Stiefvater. I read The Raven Boys a couple of years ago. Didn't really get what the hype was behind it, to be honest. I was a little bit bored by it, that sort of idea. I have heard the series gets better as it goes on, but I certainly don't want to buy any of the other books. So I had a little look on my library's catalogue, and they do have the second, third and fourth book, I believe, in the series. So I added it to my wish list just to remind myself to pick it up from the library. Next up we have a romance book, and that's called The Kiss Quotient, and this is by Helen Hone. And Jane from It's Jane Lindsay talked about this in her April wrap-up part 1. And I believe she got a copy of this from NetGalley or something like that. And this is about a main character called Stella, and Stella has Asperger's, and she finds relationships difficult, and she hires this guy called Michael. I'm not really sure what his job title is or anything like that, but she hires him to help her navigate finding love, basically. And I think it's about the relationship that develops between the two of them. And Jane had really good things to say about it, and I've sort of been enjoying a bit more romance lately, so I thought I would add that to my wish list. Next up is Before I Let You Go, and this is by Kelly Rimmer, and this is another book that Lisa from Books and Smiles has talked about, and she talked about this one in one of her Book List Thursday videos. She has this series on her channel with a couple of other booktubers where every Thursday they talk about a list of books with a different topic, and this particular week's topic was the last 5 books I purchased. And when she talks about the premise of this one, it just sounded really interesting. It follows 2 sisters, and I think at the beginning of the book they become estranged in some way. One of them, I think it's Annie, her name is, she kind of goes off, and the other sister, what is it, Lexi? Yeah, Lexi doesn't really know where she's gone, and they kind of spend years and years apart. And then there's another timeline where they're older, and Annie has had a baby, and the powers that be are threatening to put this baby into foster care. I don't know, maybe because Annie can't look after the baby properly or something like that, and she gets in contact with Lexi and asks Lexi to take the baby in. I suppose it might be about rekindling their relationship or something like that. It just sounded really sweet and really interesting, so I added that one. The last couple of books are both recommendations from Karen over at Rather Be Reading, and recently she surpassed 500 subscribers. Congratulations, totally well deserved. And she did a Q&A video where she obviously answered a load of questions that her subscribers had asked her. And she recommended a couple of books in there that I was intrigued by, the first of which is Shadow by Paula Weston, and she described this as one of her favourite series. And this is about a main character called Gabby who dreams about killing demons and things like that, and then I think it kind of turns out that those dreams are more real than she thinks. So it sounds like obviously a fantasy series. So yeah, and if she said it was one of her favourite series, so I really trust her opinion. She also talked about really liking Sarah Dessen as a writer, and I've never really had the inclination to pick anything of hers up. But yeah, she just talked about really liking her YA, I think they're all YA contemporary books, to be honest. So I had a little look at which one was her first book, just to kind of, so I could read them in order. So I added That Summer by Sarah Dessen, and like I said, this is one of her first books, and it's a YA contemporary. I suppose it's going to include a little bit of romance and that sort of thing, so I thought I'd try her out. So there we go guys, that was quite a list, so well done if you've made it to the very end. I'd love to have a chat with you in the comments below. Have you read any of these? What did you think of them? Have you got any other recommendations for me? Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.